Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and if you're watching this the day it came out, the Xbox Series X here is 4 years old. Yes, it has actually been 4 years since this console launched, and we're going to talk all about it. Now, you might have also noticed I have the good mic out here, because this is just a discussion video, and I don't really have anything specifically to show you. Before we do that, though, before we talk all about this thing's birthday, what we're going to do is, if you don't mind, if you guys could like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all my social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, etc. I appreciate the support on all those platforms. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, what we're going to do here, the basic premise of this video, is every year I like to, anyway, address the modern consoles, whichever ones are relevant. So in this case, the Xbox Series X. In a couple of days, actually, it'll be the PlayStation 5. And in March, it'll be the Nintendo Switch. I like to talk about the last year that system had and, you know, like what was interesting about it, the highlights, the lowlights, projection into the future, that kind of thing, and just kind of chat with everybody. Just kind of catching up on modern gaming type of thing, if you will. And people tend to enjoy it. So let's go ahead and do it again. Now, I'm just going to say this up front. The Xbox Series X, in of itself, didn't have that particularly interesting of a year. In fact, you know, so I sit here and I'm an old guy, right? So I sit here and I think about this. I go, you know, when I was a kid, this thing has just reached 4 years old, right? When I was a kid, that was a game generation. They didn't really go beyond 4 years except for some token releases here and there. Ever since the 2008 economic crash, we've kind of expected, particularly Gen Z, and to some extent younger millennials, have expected game console generations to last almost double what they used to. So like 6 years is now like a minimum. 7 and 8 is kind of what's expected for primary focus, not just those kind of like tail end releases that come out later. So in other words, I'm old enough to remember when this would be kind of the end of it. And now we're kind of looking at it as a little bit over a halfway point. And either way you slice it, I don't think there's too many people that would disagree with the idea that this generation, particularly with the Xbox Series X and PS5, has been kind of disappointing as far as what kind of unique content and experiences they've been offering you. At least experiences you can only acquire on that machine. The generation as a whole does have interesting titles. It's just that it doesn't really matter where you play them, which is kind of apropos because that seems to be kind of the motto everybody's going for in this generation, but aside from Nintendo, but technically they're not in this generation. We'll get to that eventually, I'm sure. And speaking of getting to other things, like I said, the PlayStation 5 will have its own video in 2 days because its birthday is November 12th, 2020, whereas this is November 10th, 2020. So happy 4th birthday. Okay, now we're going to celebrate by ripping it apart, sort of. Not really. Like, I'm going to give it a fair shake, but basically, all I really want to say with it up front, it's been kind of an uninteresting year. And in order to understand that, all you need to really know is I actually was trying to figure out what games exclusively came to the Xbox brand in the last year. I didn't come up with any. I sort of got two, and that's the reason I say sort of is because now with the Xbox, you have to always assume there's a PC version. You can't even pretend there's going to be an truly Xbox only version. So if you include that qualifier, I was able to come up with two titles that were kind of interesting enough. Hellblade 2, which came out almost at the beginning of the year, and Microsoft Flight Simulator, which I believe is a 2024, which I think is about to drop. And that's kind of it. That's it. That's insane. Indiana Jones and the Circle of Doom or whatever it's called. I don't even remember the name of it. The new Indiana Jones game by Bethesda. That game was supposed to be an exclusive, but was also dropped and is now going to be on PlayStation 5 as well. So yeah, that hasn't been super exciting. So what has actually been going on with it? Well, the thing is, there isn't a whole lot to discuss with the console itself. It's more about discussion of the Xbox brand as a whole and kind of why we got here. So in order to really understand this and paint an accurate picture of where we are, I need to kind of take you guys back to the beginning. And when I say take you back to the beginning, I'm talking about giving you a history lesson in the Xbox. So if you're Gen Z in particular or a younger millennial, you might find this kind of fascinating. Or if you're an old guy like me, you'd be like, oh yeah, memory lane. And if you're much older than me, well, I appreciate you sticking around, and I hope I'm as entertaining as Matlock. Now, basically, you need to know something about the Xbox brand. Why was it born? Most people tend to look back on it kind of casually and think, oh, well, Sega went away, so Microsoft said, we can do it, and we made a console, and that was it. No, it was a lot more convoluted than that, as naturally most things are. So you need to understand that the PC, as we now think of it, the personal computer, was basically born in the 1980s, but was not really widely adopted by most casual people, like your average person, until the 1990s, which was the height of video game console success. Was, of course, we always think of it, people my age, especially the golden age with, the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and eventually the N64, PS1, that whole thing. This is going to sound ridiculous, but it is completely true. There was a time back then where the concept of the PC was seen as a fad. It was seen as a temporary thing, not integrated into the home, where it could just be replaced. It, could have been considered like the pet rock of the 90s. It could have just been this temporary thing that wasn't going to stick around. And Microsoft, who got all of their funding from the success of Windows, was like, that's a problem. Now, why were they afraid of it? Well, funny enough, the origin of their fear comes from the Sega Saturn. The Sega Saturn had online capabilities. There were versions of it that had a keyboard, it had a printer. These were all things that came out in Japan where it was much more successful. But either way, Microsoft looked at it and went, is it possible that people might think that computers are overly complicated and they don't need those, and that a game console that can just let you go online in the rudimentary version of online access we used to have is going to replace us? That was a legitimate fear, so much so that Microsoft got involved with Sega for the Dreamcast. If you look at the bottom or the front of your Dreamcast, you'll say it's compatible with Windows CE. There was even software made by them called Web TV. There was a version of that released for the Dreamcast in Japan only. Microsoft was actually very involved in that system, mostly to integrate and learn how that industry worked. Don't forget that the Dreamcast had online support. It had a keyboard. It had all that sort of stuff. And Microsoft was like, this could be a problem. We need to protect the PC. And so when Sega went effectively belly up and had to bail on the gaming industry, Microsoft's situation was, well, we don't know how else to protect this other than to maybe have a say in where this industry goes. So in other words, what I'm trying to explain to you is the Xbox was created by Microsoft so that Microsoft could have a foothold in the console industry, not because they thought there was a ton of money in it, but because they wanted to basically use their influence there to drive the industry into another direction, so it was not a threat to the PC as a concept. I know that sounds ridiculous in 2024, but I promise you that was true at the time. So the original Xbox was at best a moderate success numerically, as far as units sold, games sold, etc. But financially, it was a complete disaster. It by the end of its run, it was net negative $4.4 billion. That's how much it cost Microsoft to do that. But the reason they didn't immediately give up on it like any other company would have is they actually achieved their goal. Their goal was to drive the industry away from PCs. And by the end of the sixth generation, which is what the original Xbox was part of, the concept of the PC was now an integrated thing in the home. Everybody had one. If you didn't have one, no one in that point in time would have thought, oh yeah, I'm going to log on to, my video game console to check my email. Like nobody was doing that anymore. It became no longer a threat. And that was an interesting needle for Microsoft to thread, because on the one hand, they had to look like they were making a game console that was really interesting and had unique experiences and innovation, while also making one that shifted us away from, PCs, but in a way that we thought the console couldn't coexist with the PC. It had to be detached from it. That's the foundation of why Microsoft makes video game consoles. Now, it could have and probably should have ended right there. But what they did instead is they said, well, that wasn't that bad of an experience. What if we actually made a system and tried to be successful with it? And that's where you got the 360. Now, I've told this story to death a million times. The 360 was actually a success, even in Japan. That's the part everybody tends to ignore. But in Japan, they screwed up royally because after 4 years of it doing well there, I believe it was Don Matrick, the guy who famously came out with the Xbox One and, did TV sports, that guy with the Xbox Online, DRM, all that stuff, connect. That guy, this dude from Canada who briefly ran the Xbox division and ran it into the ground, He had the genius idea of telling the Japanese that no. You don't want date sims and anime and shoot 'em up. Stop doing that. He shut all that down and then forced them to just have like Madden and Call of Duty and that kind of thing. And the Xbox brand completely tanked in Japan. It has never recovered since, ever. The Japanese saw that as extreme betrayal of their interests. So that market's dead for them. It had a little bit of a hiccup a couple of years ago during the pandemic, but that's totally evaporated since. But anyway, that's jumping ahead. But the Xbox 360 was overall actually pretty well received, except for the Red Rings of Death fiasco, which ended up pretty much eating all of their profit margins there. So going into the Xbox One, they made certain changes. Now, we just discussed that a little bit, but that had the most debacle of a release ever. And truly, I believe that was the end of the original idea of having a dedicated game console by Microsoft that could just compete on its own merits. After that, things had to change. So once Don Mattrick was out, and he was out pretty fast after that, they effectively put Phil Spencer in charge. Now, when I say they, I mean Microsoft. Microsoft is not Xbox. Xbox is not one man, et cetera. There's a chain of command here. And I think people often forget that Xbox and it's Phil Spencer, whoever's in charge of it at any one given time, has their own boss, someone at Microsoft corporate, who gets to make certain decisions that often kind of interfere. So at that point, Microsoft corporate probably interfered and basically said, okay, we have a couple of options here. We can shred this whole thing. Microsoft is not shy about dropping products. Anybody remember the Windows Phone or the Zune or any of that kind of stuff? If a product isn't working for them, they give up on it. Remember when they created Mixer, their own streaming service? They gave up and then told everybody to go back to Facebook. Like they're not shy about giving up on stuff they don't think is working. So they stick around with it only when there is a purpose. And Xbox has been in the red almost its entire existence, over 20 years now. Actually, 23 years. And the fact that it's still going is insane to some extent. But anyway, the point is they basically had a goal shift. So from what I understand happened is that Microsoft was actually prepared to just drop it, maybe never even release the Xbox One. There was a big conversation in there before the release date. Phil Spencer effectively came to them and said, look, I have an idea. But it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of commitment, a lot of investment. And here's the plan. He eventually says, like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and undo as many of the mistakes Don Mattrick did as possible. So like things like dropping the requirements of online DRM, dropping the Kinect, etc., retooling it into the Xbox One S, all that sort of thing. We're going to change that sort of surface level stuff. But from a greater model perspective, what I want to do is this thing called Game Pass. Now, the idea behind Game Pass was, and I've said this for years, that Microsoft has always kind of wanted to make the Xbox brand a service. And if you can make it a successful service, then you can kind of attach it to other devices, whether or not it's your phone, whether it's your television, if it's a built-in app, if it's your tablet, your PC itself, and obviously the system, maybe even Game Pass software running on other systems. Imagine Game Pass software running on like a PlayStation 5 or whatever. I've been saying that for well over a decade, that was kind of the intention. And so he basically pitched that to them by basically saying, we're going to make this operating system that is essential in gaming. Now, think basically the way Windows is essential to PCs now. Like, you could be that token guy who's using Linux, but for the most part, if you have a PC, that's what you're doing, unless, of course, you're an Apple infrastructure, but that's a completely different thing. So he was basically pitching it like, let us make this service that everybody gets involved with, everybody gets invested in. We can eventually we'll cut out physical media entirely. We'll cut out the the concept of paying for downloads, as in when you buy a concept, you don't really own it anymore. And I'm very much on the side of physical media because I do not believe digital content is ownership. And fun fact, this year, California just passed a law within the United States, so it only applies to California, where companies are no longer allowed to say a digital download is a purchase. They have to refer to it as a rental. I agree with that. Anyway, that's separate. The idea was, if you could cut out a lot of their competition, edge away at it, and get a lot of people to come over to Game Pass on the cheap, that might pick up the sales of the Xbox brand, but it would also have other benefits on their PC side of things, because they're all technically competing with Steam as well. So if you get people to subscribe to the service, hypothetically, they'll abandon other services, and then when the other services don't have enough support, they'll eventually capitulate and collapse. And then you start to get into the monopoly area. But once you have more of a monopoly, you can also increase your prices, etc. So you basically hook them in with the first taste is free type of mentality. That model did not work initially because they did not have enough of their own development software. Like Halo wasn't going to cut it to make everybody come over. So the next thing they started doing was buying up studios. Things like Bethesda. Now Bethesda was what, like a $7 billion plus investment, $7 billion. And everybody thought like, wow, that was a game changer. Like that's going to make the Xbox brand relevant. Because like, think about, they'll have exclusive access to Fallout, Elder Scrolls, Doom, Wolfenstein, like all these major things. And they did almost nothing with any of it in the last few years. Like their big release was Starfield, which wasn't even that well received. They had some, critically acclaimed little indie type of games that didn't really do much. They had cool things like Hi-Fi Rush that were good, but just didn't really push units, like that kind of thing. And so that merger didn't really go much of anywhere. But it was good to theoretically have all those assets on the side of Game Pass. And then they decided to do it again with the Activision. I know there was a few others in there, but like these are the big ones. So Activision was a $68 billion acquisition, which actually was only, relatively recently within the last year or so, been completed. After having to go through obviously financial hurdles, legal hurdles, all sorts of issues there. But they have sorted out. Microsoft now wholly owns Activision. But that may have been the straw that broke the camel's back, because we get to that point and you realize how much money. I think Microsoft's higher ups finally stepped in and raised an eyebrow and said, like, I don't think this Game Pass strategy is ever going to work, because it really hasn't been working. And the Activision merger really seemed to be what opened their eyes to it, because in order for that merger to go through, there were a lot of legal concessions. So a lot of the games that would have been exclusive to it, things like Call of Duty, can't be. They end up being, multi-platform anyway, which is kind of what happened with the Bethesda stuff too. So a lot of the stuff that would have driven people to Game Pass doesn't matter on there, which is just kind of insane. But yeah, I think that what happened earlier this year, so we're now finally getting into this year, around the beginning of the year, there was a lot of rumors about Microsoft possibly quitting consoles, dropping everything entirely, maybe fire sale on all their assets, whatever it is, to the point where Microsoft felt they actually had to have a conference addressing all of this. And I did videos on it at the time. And what basically we figured out from that whole thing, no, they were not quitting, but they were definitely realigning. We're pretty sure what happened now is that after the Activision merger, Microsoft's corporate overlords basically looked at it and said, I don't think this is going to pan out. You guys need to change the direction of this. We need to find different ways to bring in some income here and shave off some dead weight, etc. So we got some studio closures like Tango Works and a few others, which I think was their only Japanese studio at the time. A few of these studios got shut down. Some people got relocated, etc. And they're just kind of doing a lot of what you would call corporate shuffling. But the big news out of that was that a lot of games, I think Grounded was one of them, Hi-Fi Rush was also one of them, games were getting moved over to the Nintendo Switch and to the PlayStation 5. So for the first time in their history, Microsoft's just like, yeah, we're going to make games for other people's systems. I can almost guarantee that was not Phil Spencer's idea, even though I think he's the one that announced it, because I'm pretty sure I'm just going to guess that this year was largely defined by a board of corporate directors who have somewhat degraded Phil Spencer's power. They kind of replaced him with Sarah Bond. And I think that they're basically telling them, like, we care more about numbers now. We don't really want to hear about these, like, grand overarching strategies and whatever it is. We just want some numbers. And so there's numbers in selling some of these pre-existing games on other competing hardware. And now, like I said, I did videos on that at the time, breaking that down in more detail, but it is just kind of insane that like we opened this year up with Microsoft being like, we're going to put games on our competition. And they haven't really put a whole lot of new stuff on their own system. As I said, this year we had 2 exclusives. It's been very strange. But in a nutshell, that's kind of been the overarching history of Xbox up to this point. So what ends up kind of changing around then is this idea of whether or not they're going to keep proceeding forward with any of this. And there was this phase where they were kind of running around with their heads cut off like a chicken or whatever, trying to figure out what the strategy was. And it seems like they've kind of settled back on it. And this is the insane one. What their new strategy seems to be is the future is the cloud. So does anybody, I mean, I'm sure you guys know what the concept of the cloud is by now. It's not a weird idea anymore. It's the idea of like uploading games or downloading games from a service, file that's very like, Google Cloud, or, Microsoft has their own cloud, but there's Google Drive, whatever. You just, an archive of data that's not hosted by you. It's hosted by the company you're entrusting it to. And Microsoft is trying to push games to basically run through their system. Now, as someone who's, again, a big proponent of physical media and the concept of ownership and the right of ownership, I find this concept mortifying. But it does seem to be where they want to bring things. Now, they have the most robust cloud system of any gaming company out there, but robust in the sense they put the most effort into it and they offer the most content, but not from a technical perspective. They're effectively trying to do what the Google Stadia was doing, but not limited as far as amount of content, but they are limiting it as far as the versions of the games. So like the games that are up there are typically the Xbox Series S versions of games running at a lower frame rate, running at a lower resolution, etc. And the reasoning behind that is because obviously running something through a cloud does require a persistent stream of internet access. And if you are doing that, it's easier when there's lower data thresholds. In other words, if the game is smaller, it'll run better, effectively, is what I'm trying to say. So if you are Microsoft and you're saying, okay, this strategy hasn't been working, how do we kind of reconstitute it? We still want to do this. Xbox is a service thing. We still want to make Xbox the equivalency of Windows as it is for games. Like we want Windows, we want games and Xbox to just be like synonymous, interchangeable terms, to the point where on a PC, again, unless you are that Linux guy, you just always assume it's got Windows on it. How do we do that with Xbox and other hardware? How do we integrate our software into everything? Well, if you make something that's the most universally compatible with the lowest amount of bandwidth, hypothetically, that's your solution. Recently, both Google and Apple lost lawsuits preventing outside selling distribution systems within their own ecosystems. In other words, on Android phones already, you are able to download Xbox software that allows you to, within it, download Xbox games and allow you to run them, granted in low cloud version, modes. We now have televisions that have the same functionality, thus eliminating the need for the console. The thing with this, though, is this does not seem like a Phil Spencer idea. And I don't know if it's a Sarah Bond idea. I would bet that it's not. This seems like a board of corporate directors idea where they say, wait a minute. So there's all these people playing these games. They're going on a bus or, they're on the plane or whatever they're doing. And they're playing all these games, and these games have like 60 million, 100 million downloads, whatever. We got to have that, but for our stuff. But these people do not strike me as necessarily gamers themselves. As I said before, there is a difference between whoever's running Xbox, the Xbox brand, and Microsoft, its corporate overlords. And they don't necessarily all have the same idea. And so the people who technically have all the power is the Microsoft corporate overlords. And if they're just looking at it like, wow, that game had 100 million downloads, that freemium game had that, we should make sure that our games have that too. But they're basically thinking, well, why don't we do that by just charging only a few dollars for it? Then people can download like the latest, Halo or Gears of War or whatever we're thinking about putting on there. Maybe the new Call of Duty. We can put the new Call of Duty on your phone and people will play it while they're waiting for the bus, which I find insane because not only would the bandwidth allocations be really difficult for that, imagine trying to play that game with just a touch screen and everything. Like that's not really what actual gamers want to do. The type of games you play on a mobile game are very simplistic and are very just kind of stuff you can point and just tap. And it's a very different market. Your casual market, I guess what I would say, is what they think they're trying to integrate with, but they don't understand it's not a market available for them. And I would bet you that Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond get this, but they're just doing what their bosses want them to do, which is to push this weird cloud narrative. Now, what does any of that really have to do with this system? Sadly, not much. And that's kind of my whole point. They haven't really done anything with the system itself. Like this year, other than those two exclusives, if you want to even call them that, because again, they have PC versions, the only other thing they've really done is they released an all-digital version of the same machine. They released the Xbox One X white S, it's not even called the S. I hate Microsoft's Xbox names. The Xbox Series X White Edition that has no disk drive. It's all digital. It's $50 less than the retail of this one, which, again, as someone who's a proponent of physical media, is not something I would even be remotely interested in. And it seems to be their big holiday device for the year. There's also some like Galaxy edition that actually is kind of cool looking. It looks like a bit like a Starfield, appropriately enough. And it has a 2 terabyte internal storage. It retails at like $600. But that's about it, guys. They really haven't done much else. And I've read that they have no intention of creating any sort of, shall we say, pro version of the system to compete directly with the PS5 Pro. They're just kind of, I really think what they're doing is they're just being told, Microsoft overlords are telling Xbox brand specifically, you can continue to do this like games distribution model, kind of like Game Pass, but it has to focus on being on more platforms now. And, you know, we're thinking we'll get rid of the hardware side of things because on a philosophical level, if I didn't understand how the gaming market worked and I thought, okay, what is the reason that guy over there on his phone won't play my Xbox games? It's, well, because the games aren't on his Xbox. In order for him to play my games, he has to buy this like, you know, $400, $450 machine. What if I got rid of that? Maybe I'm doing him a huge favor. And now all he has to do is download my app. He pays me like a few bucks for a game and he can play whatever he wants. On the surface, without really understanding things, that kind of makes sense until you get into the fact that that guy on his phone is not playing that, because if he's going to want to play the next Call of Duty, he's not going to want to play a low resolution cloud streaming version with his finger. What he's going to want to do is wait till he's home, he has a proper setup and he has a solid connection, maybe even downloads it himself or has, you know, installs it if he gets the physical edition and plays it on a 4K screen and just like really experiences it. That is that type of market that plays those type of games. Mobile games are very simplistic. Very simplistic. In fact, I actually enjoy just one. I fly a lot, so United Airlines has like a built-in like, you know, game where you just try to land planes, but it's just a matter of dragging your finger and like drawing a line essentially. That's the extent of what a mobile game should be. You can't have a big complex adventure on there, you know, and that's part of why, you know, the Sony kind of got out of handhelds, was because they realized they were making these big like console experiences on portables and they were too complex for people, even though they were cool for the hardcore among us. The masses didn't want that. Nintendo's always been smart about giving you a pick up and play type of experience, hence their handhelds always do better, but we'll talk about them eventually on their own Switch video in, you know, a few months. Anyway, so that's kind of it for that. Now, as far as the future goes, I don't know what kind of future the thing actually has. Like, I think we're getting a few more years of this same basic idea. I don't think they're doing any more mergers anytime soon. I think they're kind of done with that. I would be very curious to see how many more things they integrate with this. As I said, they don't seem to have any plans for any sort of upgraded version of this. They don't seem to have any great plans for any sort of big exclusive games anymore. They just don't seem to have any kind of plans that are meant to get us excited. Like, the only one I can kind of think about that is only, you know, an idea to me is, since they own Activision, they could hypothetically add a new backwards compatibility update to give us a whole bunch of, you know, original Xbox and 360 games to work on here. And there were some rumors about that for a bit, but like, that's it. That's not even really a future. That's just dragging up the past. And I mean that in a good way for once, but it's just bizarre. So it's way too early to speculate about next generation hardware on this thing. They do claim they're doing something, but that could be anything, dude. That could be like a USB stick that you're just supposed to plug into your TV, and it's just a streaming device. Like, we don't know what that really means. As time goes on, when they talk about all these other regions they're in, they're also countering points, like saying, "Oh yeah, you know, we're." You know, I think it was actually an issue with Saudi Arabia where there was some rumor the Xbox was no longer going to be sold there, and the response was like, "Well, it's still available there, and it's also going to be available on, you know, the Xbox experience will be available on PC and cloud gaming and mobile." That kind of response to me says you don't really care about this machine, which unfortunately, given this year, has been very self-evident. So, yeah. Anyway, I hope that you guys found that kind of interesting. I'm curious what you guys thought of this whole year of the Xbox brand. Did you enjoy it at all? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there weren't any good games released on this machine within the last year. It's just that nothing on this machine, with the exception of Hellblade 2 and I guess, you know, Flight Simulator 2024, were really all that special to it. They were all things I could have got on the PS5 for the most part. And technically, those two I could have got on the PC. All of them you can get on the PC. Once you reach a point where the system is digital only, like that digital version of this system, unless you are super integrated to the Xbox network already, you are that audience that has Game Pass and you've been totally committed to it. Unless you are that audience already, there's effectively no point in owning an Xbox piece of hardware anymore, because a new entry person doesn't have any of those games accessible to them. And now they can't buy used games. They can't borrow games from their friends. They can't do any of that sort of stuff. They just are totally reliant on a digital ecosystem, and they put down $500 or $600 to get that first. Hence, they're thinking if we just let them play stuff on their phone that they'll be on board. I don't think that's going to work, but I guess time will tell on that one. Anyway, so if that'll do it for me right now. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you guys could do me a favor, please like the video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before. I really am serious though. Please tell me what you guys thought about this year. Any sort of thoughts, whatever it is. I'm curious what everybody out there is thinking on where this generation is and where it's going, especially the Xbox. So yeah, obviously stay tuned. I will be doing one for the PS5 in a couple of days. But until then, do me a favor. Again, like the video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, and check out all the social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, my travel channel, etc. I appreciate the support. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.